On January 16th, 2017, in the final 33 minutes of a show that began as an 11-minute slacker comedy about two park employees who wanted to play video games, two cartoon spaceships flew between the fists of a god and his evil twin brother as the universe was being uncreated around them. The pilots were a blue jay and a raccoon. 6.5 years earlier, on the very first night the show ever aired, the same two characters had been wrestling with a stuffed doll in their bedroom, accidentally punching a hole in the wall and stealing a magical keyboard from a wizard who had stopped to pee in some bushes. The show did not announce that it had become a different show. It happened the way most things in a long-running animated series happen, which is too slowly to notice, one decision at a time. This is the story of those decisions, and of why nearly every one of them, taken alone, was the right one. There is a particular kind of grief that is reserved for shows you grew up with. It is not the grief of a show being bad. Bad shows are easy. You stop watching them and you forget about them. The grief comes from a show that started out being exactly the thing you needed and then gradually, year after year, became something you did not need at all, while keeping the same characters, the same animation style, the same theme song, and the same opening title card. Regular Show, which ran on Cartoon Network from September 6th, 2010 to January 16th, 2017, across 8 seasons and 244 episodes, is one of the cleanest examples of this phenomenon in 21st century animation, and it is one of the most instructive because it did not get worse for the reason most people think. Before we go any further, a quick note. If you find this kind of long-form essay helpful for falling asleep, subscribing genuinely keeps these videos coming. It is free, it takes about 3 seconds, and it is the only nudge you will get from me tonight. Now, back to the show. The thesis of this essay is simple. Regular Show did not decline because it ran out of jokes. It did not decline because the writers got lazy, or because the network meddled, or because the audience moved on. It declined because the form it was built on, the strange little 11-minute engine that made the first 2 seasons electric, was structurally incompatible with the show it eventually wanted to become. Every choice the writers made to keep the show interesting after season 3 was, in isolation, a defensible creative choice. The serialization, the romantic arcs, the recurring villains, the cosmic stakes, the supporting cast development, the space arc, the grand finale. Each one of those choices made the show a little less of what it originally was, and there was no version of the show that could have made all those choices and remained the original show. You are about to spend the next 2 hours with the slow and often beautiful unraveling of a cartoon. You can fall asleep during any of it. The story will keep going whether you stay awake or not. The original promised the thing that almost nobody mentions about Regular Show in 2026 is that for its first 2 years on the air, it was, in pure ratings terms, the most successful new Cartoon Network had launched in years. The pilot, an 11-minute episode called The Power, premiered on September 6th, 2010, and was watched by 2.097 million viewers. According to Nielsen Media Research, the show ranked number 1 in its time slot among all key boy demographics across all of television. Not all of cable, all of television. Among boys, more people were watching this little show about a blue jay and a raccoon than were watching, in that exact half-hour window, any other program on any other channel. Within months, episodes were averaging between 2 and 2.5 million viewers a week. By season 3, individual episodes like Skip's Story were drawing 43 million viewers, which would put them on the list of the most watched cable cartoon episodes of the year. To understand the decline, you have to understand what was actually working in those first 24 months, because the answer is more specific than anyone usually gives it credit for. J.G. Quintel created Regular Show out of an aborted Cartoon Network development project called the Cartoonstitute. The pitch was almost embarrassingly direct. Cartoon Network executives wanted to give young animators no-notes pilots, and Quintel pitched a show about being 23 years old. He was 28 when the show premiered. He had been at the California Institute of the Arts in his early 20s, and the central friendship of the show, between Mordecai and Rigby, was a more or less direct transcription of the dynamic between him and his college friend, Sean Sales. Quintel has said in multiple interviews that Mordecai is, in his own words, the version of him from his CalArts years, when you were hanging out with your friends and getting into stupid situations, but you were also taking it seriously enough. Rigby was a raccoon Quintel had drawn one day for no reason while doodling, hula hooping, and the design stuck. That biographical fact is not a piece of trivia. It is the entire structural logic of the early show. Regular Show was not a comedy about characters. It was a comedy about a specific age. The age where you have a job, but you do not yet have a career. The age where you live in a house that is not your house, with a friend who is not your spouse, and you spend your evenings on a couch trying to decide whether to play one more video game before bed. Mordecai and Rigby were 23 in the pilot, and they were 23 in the final season. The show was about that frozen year of life, and about the things that happen inside of it. This is what the early form was for. In the pilot episode The Power, Mordecai and Rigby are wrestling with a stuffed doll named Beef Burrito in their bedroom in the upstairs of the park house. Rigby decides to drop himself onto a trampoline and bounces into the wall, leaving a hole. They panic. They cannot let their boss Benson, who is a gumball machine, see the hole. Rigby reveals he has stolen a magical keyboard from a wizard. They use the keyboard to manipulate Skips, who is an immortal Yeti, voiced by Mark Hamill, into giving them what they need. They mess up the wording of the command and accidentally send Skips to the moon. They go to the moon. They fight a monster. Rigby uses a body slapping skill called hamboning to distract the monster. They save Skips. They come home. They cover the hole in the wall with a poster. The episode ends. The total runtime is 11 minutes. Quintel has called it his favorite episode of the entire series. If you want to understand what made early Regular Show work, you have to look at the structure of that episode. Notice the rhythm. A small, ordinary, specifically low-stakes problem. A hole in the wall. Then, a tiny act of mischief. Then, a sudden escalation into the cosmic and absurd. A Yeti getting blasted to the surface of the moon. Then, a return to scale. Then, the small problem gets solved by the most boring possible means. A poster. The episode is shaped like a sigh. You start at small. You climb to enormous. You return to small. This shape is the entire engine of the early show. It is not a coincidence that Quintel chose the pilot to be exactly this. He understood from the inside that the comedy was not in the cosmic escalation. The comedy was in the contrast between the cosmic escalation and the smallness of the original stakes. The keyboard sends people to the moon, but the keyboard exists because of a hole in a wall that two roommates do not want their landlord to find out about. The smallness is what gives the bigness its shape. Without the smallness, the bigness is just a science fiction action sequence. With the smallness, it is comedy, and it is weirdly also something close to art. Almost every episode of seasons 1 and 2 follows this exact rhythm. In Just Set Up the Chairs, the second episode of the show, the duo is asked to do one task: set up some folding chairs for an event, and an old arcade game accidentally summons the apocalypse. In Caffeinated Concert Tickets, they want to go to a concert by a fake rock band called Fist Pump, and end up powering through 3 days without sleep. In Death Punchies, Rigby learns a martial arts move from a videotape and accidentally becomes addicted to it. In Free Cake, they try to skip Skips' birthday party for free cake. In Meet Your Maker, Mordecai loses Skip's favorite hot dog, and they have to drive to a meat factory at the bottom of an elevator shaft. In Grilled Cheese Deluxe, they try to eat Benson's secret grilled cheese sandwich. In The Unicorns Have Got to Go, 3 obnoxious unicorns invade the park and have to be defeated. In Prank Callers, a magical phone call sends them back in time to the 1980s, and they nearly erase themselves from existence. Look at the size of the original problem in each one of those episodes. A grilled cheese, a hot dog, some folding chairs, a concert, a birthday party, a videotape. The problems are small enough that they would not even register as an inconvenience in your real life. The escalations are huge. They include time travel, demonic possession, the apocalypse, the surface of the moon, the inside of a video game, a 1980s synth pop afterlife, and the genuine end of the world. And every single time, the show climbs back down to the small thing at the end. The hole gets covered with a poster. The chairs get set up. The hot dog gets returned. The cake gets eaten. This is not a show about adventures. This is a show about getting through Tuesday. There is a very particular flavor of comfort in that engine, and you can feel it in the texture of the early episodes in a way that is hard to describe. The animation was hand-drawn on paper, not on Cintiq tablets, because Quintel insisted on it, saying he found the analog process more organic and more representative of each artist's style. The lines are imperfect. The characters' eyes wobble slightly between frames. The backgrounds are flat and slightly muddy in color. The score, by Mark Mothersbaugh, the founding member of the band Devo, is built on tinny synthesizers and quiet keyboard pads that feel like they are being played from another room. The licensed music, almost all of it from the 1980s, was chosen because the writers were screening animatics with copyrighted songs as placeholders, and Cartoon Network executives liked the songs and asked them to license them. None of this was a marketing strategy. All of it was guys in their late 20s making the show they wanted to watch when they got home from work. That tone is the thing that disappeared, and the show never got it back. Not because the people changed, because the form changed. By the end of season 1, you can already see the structural seams of the show beginning to show. The first 12 episodes, which aired between September 6th and November 22nd, 2010, are almost completely standalone. They have no continuity beyond the existence of the cast. You could watch them in any order. You could miss 6 of them and still understand the 7th. The most popular episode of that first season, The Unicorns Have Got to Go, was watched by 2.417 million people. The least popular, Caffeinated Concert Tickets, was watched by 1.715 million. Even the bottom of the season was by 2010 cable cartoon standards, a hit. Season 2, which ran from November 29th, 2010 to August 1st, 2011, expanded the run to 28 episodes. The same standalone structure held. Each episode was an 11-minute, self-contained unit. The supporting characters, Pops the lollipop-headed park owner, Skips the immortal Yeti, Muscle Man the green-skinned older guy, and his ghost friend High Five Ghost, all stayed roughly where they had been in season 1. They were color, not plot. The most watched episode, First Day, drew 2.634 million viewers. The least watched, Brain Eraser, drew 905,000. Already, by the end of season 2, you can see the bottom of the audience floor sliding downward. But the average remained huge, and the show had not yet started to need the kind of narrative scaffolding that would, in 3 years, begin to crush it. If regular show had ended at the conclusion of season 2 in August of 2011, after 40 episodes of perfectly calibrated 11-minute slacker comedy with cosmic punchlines, it would today be remembered as one of the great brief and perfect cartoons of the early 2010s. Like Pendleton Ward's earliest seasons of Adventure Time, like the original run of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, a specific tone, beautifully executed, then closed. It did not end. It got renewed for season 3, and the form, the engine, the rhythm of small to cosmic to small started to develop a small but persistent crack. That crack was not a mistake. That crack was the show trying to grow up. The serialization wound in the first 40 episodes of regular show, almost nothing carries over. There are no relationship arcs, no ongoing villains, no slowly building mysteries. Margaret, the Red Robin who works at the coffee shop, appears in Season 1, Episode 3, Caffeinated Concert Tickets, and is implied to be Mordecai's crush. But the crush goes nowhere across the rest of Season 1. It barely registers in Season 2. The supporting cast does not have backstories. Skips is mysterious because he is mysterious, not because the show is teasing a reveal. Pops is a wealthy, lollipop-headed man because that is funny, not because his origin is going to matter someday. The world of the park house and the cart and the snack bar exists because it exists. There is no metaphysics underneath it. That changes in Season 3. Season 3, which aired from September 19th, 2011 to September 3rd, 2012, was the moment the writer's room stopped being satisfied with the engine they had built. You can read it in the episode titles. You can read it in the structural choices. The season has 39 episodes, which was a substantial expansion. And buried inside those 39 episodes is the first sustained attempt at story arcs in the history of the show. Skips finally gets a backstory in the episode Skips' Story, which reveals that he is functionally immortal because he was given a magical gift centuries ago, that he was once a teenage boy named Walks, and that he had a great love named Mona who died, which is why he no longer skips, but actually walks, and goes by the name Skips. Mordecai and Margaret begin an actual they won't they arc, building toward an episode called Do Me a Solid, then The Best Burger in the World, then a long stretch in which Mordecai keeps almost telling Margaret how he feels and almost not. The season finale, Bad Kiss, is named after the small, awkward kiss that Mordecai accidentally plants on Margaret's chin. Season 3 is, by the consensus of fans and critics, one of the best seasons of the show. The episode Excellent, which aired on January 9th, 2012, as the 17th episode of the season, won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Short Format Animated Program later that year. It is the show's only Primetime Emmy win. But the seeds that allow the show to win that Emmy are also the seeds that begin the unraveling. Because once the show starts giving its characters arcs, it is no longer free to just have an 11-minute Tuesday. Every time Mordecai is in a scene, his unresolved feelings about Margaret are now a thing the writers have to remember. Every time Skips appears, his past with Mona is potentially relevant. Every time the duo meets a new villain, the question of whether that villain will return is suddenly on the table, where it had not been before. The show has acquired a memory. A memory is expensive. You have probably noticed this in your own television watching life. Sitcoms with no memory, the early Simpsons, Seinfeld, the original 3 seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants, can run forever because every episode resets. Sitcoms with memory, the later Simpsons, the kind of arc-driven prestige cartoons of the 2010s, have to manage their memory like a budget. Each new piece of remembered information costs the writers something. The show has to be consistent with what came before. It has to evolve. It has to pay off setups. And, crucially, the audience starts to expect those payoffs, which means episodes that do not contribute to the arc start to feel like filler instead of like the main event. For an 11-minute Tuesday show, this is a particularly cruel mathematics. Every minute spent on the arc is a minute not spent on the episode. Every callback to a previous emotional beat is a callback that costs you airtime in a comedy structure that only has 11 minutes to set up and pay off a joke. Watch what happens to the structure of the episodes in Season 4. Season 4 premiered on October 1st, 2012, with a half-hour double-length episode called Exit 9B. The episode was directed by John Davis Infantino and Sean Sales, and the basic premise is that 2 months have passed, and a mysterious bearded contractor has seized the park, brainwashed every member of the cast, and is preparing to bulldoze the land to build a freeway off-ramp called Exit 9B. Mordecai and Rigby use a time machine from a previous episode to skip the 2 months, return to the park, and have to find each member of the brainwashed cast, jog their memory, and get them to sign a document that will preserve the park as a historic site. Once the cast is reassembled, the bearded contractor is revealed to be Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., the son of a giant floating head villain from a previous season's episode called High Score. Then the dead villains of every previous season come pouring out of a hole in the ground. Then there is a 10-minute battle that pulls in nearly every recurring side character in the show's history. Then a new intern named Thomas signs the document, and the park is saved. Read the description of that episode out loud and listen to how it sounds. It does not sound like the same show that opened with 2 roommates trying to cover up a hole in the wall with a poster. It sounds like a season finale to a fantasy serial. The Audio Visual Club, in their review of the episode that aired the next day, wrote that the show had effectively doubled down on the insanity, rather than slow down, for a meditative episode about consequences. They were right. The choice was deliberate. But here is what is hard to see in the moment. Exit 9B is structurally a great episode of one kind of show, the kind of show that has cumulative continuity, recurring villains, and big crossover events. And it is structurally a problem episode for another kind of show, which is the kind of show regular show used to be. It rewards you for having watched the previous 3 seasons. The joke about Garrett Bobby Ferguson is funny because you remember the giant floating head from season 2, and you remember that he exploded into wave after wave of brain goo, and you remember that Mordecai and Rigby beat him at a video game called Broken Bonus. If you have not seen those episodes, the joke is just a giant floating head doing nothing in particular. That is, in technical terms, a forward incompatibility. The audience that loved the show in season 1, the casual 11-year-old watching 1 episode at a time on a Wednesday afternoon after homework, can no longer enter the show in season 4 without homework of their own. The show has acquired a barrier to entry, and the barrier will keep growing for the next 4 years. Look at the rest of season 4. The arc continues. Margaret's relationship with Mordecai progresses through episodes like Family Barbecue, in which Mordecai meets her parents, and Meteor Moves, in which Mordecai finally kisses her. The supporting cast acquires more individual arcs. Muscle Man begins his slow turn from joke character into emotional center, with episodes about his weight, his self-esteem, his eventual girlfriend Starla. Pops gets glimpses of mythology. Skips gets more backstory. The new intern Thomas, introduced in Exit 9B as a goat with glasses, becomes a quiet recurring presence, and the writers will eventually reveal in Season 6 that he has been a Russian spy named Nikolai the entire time, in an episode called The Real Thomas. Each of these is a creative choice. Each of them has merit on its own, and each of them slowly drains the original engine of fuel. The Season 4 finale, Stake Me Amadeus, which aired on August 12, 2013, is the episode where the cost of the new approach starts to become visible. The premise of the episode is that Mordecai is taking Margaret to an extremely fancy restaurant called Stake Me Amadeus to ask her to officially be his girlfriend. The first half of the episode is, in classic old regular show fashion, a wild, absurdist plot about counterfeit Amadeus dollars, a robot bear villain, and a SWAT team raid on the restaurant. The episode then resolves the absurdist plot at the halfway mark and pivots in its final 5 minutes into something the show has never really done before. Mordecai asks Margaret if she will be his girlfriend. Margaret says she has been accepted to her dream college, Milton University, and is leaving town. She bursts into tears. She runs out of the restaurant. The episode ends with Mordecai sitting on the roof of the park house at sunset, holding a can of soda, with Rigby silently next to him. That is, by any reasonable measure, a strong piece of cartoon writing. The TV Tropes recap of the episode classifies the ending as a bittersweet ending, and notes the intentional structural symmetry with the Season 4 premiere, in which the park crew also confronted a final boss. The final scene is one of the quietest emotional beats the show ever stages. It is also a wound the show will not be able to heal, because Margaret is now gone, and the show has been writing toward this relationship for 4 seasons, which is to say, for half of its eventual run. The audience that started watching the show because they loved the dynamic between Mordecai and Rigby goofing off in a park has now spent 4 years, by 2013, watching that dynamic get gradually displaced by Mordecai's unresolved romantic life. And the resolution of that romantic life is, at the end of Season 4, not a resolution. It is a delay. Margaret has gone to college. She will be back. Mordecai is now grieving someone who is alive and who he can theoretically text. What the show is doing, structurally, in this moment, is not telling a story. It is opening a door it cannot close. That door, the door of Mordecai's unresolved feelings about Margaret, is going to stay open for the next 2.5 seasons. It is going to swallow most of the romantic and emotional energy of the show. It is going to require the introduction of a second love interest, CJ, who arrives in Season 5 to fill the slot. It is going to require an ongoing love triangle that exhausts the audience's patience by Season 6. It is going to lead, in June of 2015, to the most hated episode in the show's history, in which a wedding scene becomes a meltdown about Mordecai's incapacity to choose between 2 women. And it is going to end without ever really being resolved, because Mordecai will eventually marry, in the finale's 25-year time jump, a third character who has not yet been introduced. That is what serialization costs you. It costs you the ability to be small. Once you have asked the audience to invest in an unresolved emotional thread, you cannot go back to making episodes about whether you can finish a sandwich. Or you can, but the audience will feel you stalling. Every minute the show spends on the Small Tuesday is now a minute the audience is wondering when you are going to address the unresolved relationship. The show has lost the power to do its own original form, and it knew it. That is what is heartbreaking. You can read it in the structural choices of Season 4. The premiere, Exit 9B, is a maximalist crossover battle. The finale, Stake Me Amadeus, is a quiet romantic gut punch. Between them, the show is trying to be 3 different shows at once: a 1980s slacker sitcom, a serialized drama, an anthology of cosmic absurdism, and it is starting to feel like all 3 are competing for the same 11 minutes. Season 4 of regular show ends with the lowest rated episode of the season, Starter Pack, drawing 1.859 million viewers. The most watched episode of the season, Terra Tales of the Park 2, drew 3.109 million. That gap between 1.86 million and 3.11 million is not the gap of a successful show getting more popular. It is the gap of a show whose audience has begun to sort itself. The audience that wanted the original engine, the Small Tuesday with the cosmic punchline, was still showing up for the right episodes. The audience that wanted the larger scale, more serialized stories was also showing up for theirs. But fewer and fewer people were showing up for both. The show had begun to fracture. What Season 5 did with that fracture is the next part of the story. And it is the part that people who stopped watching regular show somewhere in the middle of its run almost always cite as the beginning of the end. They are right that something broke during Season 5. They are mostly wrong about what. The love triangle and the stalling engine Season 5 of regular show ran from September 2nd, 2013 to August 14th, 2014, across 37 episodes. By any objective measure, it was a strong season of television. The Thanksgiving special, which aired in November 2013, drew 3.043 million viewers and remains one of the highest-rated episodes the show ever produced. Multiple episodes from the season are still cited by longtime fans as among the show's best. The animation was tighter than Season 4. The supporting cast was richer. The continuity was more confident. And yet, by the end of the season, you could find threads on television forums and on TV Tropes and on Reddit where fans were beginning to use a phrase about regular show that they had never used before. The phrase was that the show was starting to feel stale. A review of the season finale Real Date in the trade publication Bubble Blabber on August 28, 2014, included this exact word. The reviewer wrote that Real Date had him feeling like regular show was limping into the finale. He noted that the dating site villain in the episode was the only thing keeping him interested. He wrote that without that minor antagonist, the rest of the episode would have been dreadfully boring. This was a finale review of a show that 2 years earlier had been winning primetime Emmys. Something had clearly happened. What had happened was the introduction of CJ. CJ, whose full nickname is Cloudy J, is a humanoid cloud character voiced by Linda Cardellini. She made her debut in a season 3 episode called Yes Dude Yes in 2012, in a small role as a character Mordecai briefly meets. She returned in early season 5 as a serious romantic interest. The narrative reasoning was clean. Margaret had left for college at the end of season 4, and the show needed to give Mordecai a path forward that did not require Margaret to come back. So CJ was promoted from a one-off bit character to a full-time love interest. She was given a backstory. She was given an emotional weather system, literally, since her body became a thunderstorm when she got upset. She was given a friendship with Mordecai's other friends. By the end of season 5, she and Mordecai were dating. The episode New Year's Kiss in late season 5 established their first kiss at a New Year's Eve masquerade party. The episode I Like You High in mid-season 5 established Mordecai's gradual emotional commitment to her. The season 5 finale, Real Date, was about CJ and Mordecai's first formal romantic dinner. There is, on paper, nothing wrong with any of this. There is also, on paper, something the show was about to be unable to escape. Margaret was going to come back. Everyone watching knew Margaret was going to come back. Margaret was the show's first love interest. She had been built up for 4 seasons, and the writers had not given her a clean closing chapter. They had given her an open exit, which is the most expensive kind of exit a long-running show can write. As long as she existed in the universe of the show, off-screen, in college, the audience knew she would eventually return. And as long as that return was pending, every scene of CJ and Mordecai was implicitly a scene about the inevitable collision. This is the structural mistake that broke season 6. Season 6 premiered on October 9th, 2014, with the episode Maxin and Relaxin, and ended on June 25th, 2015, with Dumped at the Altar. It is, by the consensus of longtime fans, the lowest rated season of the show's run by reception, even if not always by raw viewership. Episodes from this season have IMDb ratings noticeably below the seasons before and after. Fan retrospectives written years later refer to season 6 as the lowest point in the series. There is a Telepedia entry, the successor to several large fan wiki networks, that calls the season finale specifically the most unwatchable moment in regular show history. To understand why, you have to understand what season 6 did with the Margaret return. Margaret returns to the show in the season 5 episode Yes Dude Yes, then more substantially in the early season 6 episode Just Friends. The episode is a half-hour double-length unit. The premise is that Margaret, now grown and confident from her time at college, returns to town and tells Mordecai she still has feelings for him. By this point, Mordecai is already dating CJ. The conflict is exactly the conflict the writers walked themselves into at the end of season 4. Mordecai now has 2 romantic partners in the field, and he is too emotionally young to choose between them. The writer's room, by all available evidence, did not know what to do with this. They had written themselves into a triangle that had no good resolution. CJ had been built up as the new love interest with full audience investment for an entire season. Margaret had been built up as the original love interest with audience investment going back to season 1. Pick CJ, and you betray 4 seasons of Margaret setup. Pick Margaret, and you betray a season and a half of CJ setup. Have him pick neither, and you have wasted both arcs. Have him pick both. By the end of the run, and you have a soap opera, not a slacker comedy. So the writers stalled. The Margaret versus CJ arc runs through almost the entirety of season 6. There is a Christmas-themed episode called Sad Sacks, in which Margaret kisses Mordecai while he is dating CJ. There is a follow-up episode called Icy Turtles, in which CJ confides to Mordecai that she cannot be around Margaret. There is an episode called Cool Bro Bots, about a robot Mordecai builds to handle the emotional decision he cannot make. There is an episode called Dumptown, USA, in which Mordecai, having been rejected by both women, ends up in a literal town for people who have been dumped. The arc continues, and continues, and continues. It ends, badly, in the season finale, Dumped at the Altar. The premise of the episode is that Muscle Man is marrying his longtime girlfriend Starla. Mordecai has been asked to give a best man style speech at the wedding. He is still emotionally torn between Margaret and CJ, both of whom are at the wedding. During the speech, Mordecai goes off script. He talks not about Muscle Man and Starla, but about his own indecision. He asks the audience whether his soulmate is among them. He fails to point in CJ's direction when he asks the question. CJ, watching, realizes Mordecai cannot bring himself to choose her. She gives him back the charm bracelet he gave her in the previous season. She runs out of the wedding crying. The wedding continues. The episode ends. This is the episode that broke the audience. Look at the fan response. The TV Tropes recap of the episode classifies the ending under the trope ship sinking. The fan retrospective on Telepedia calls Mordecai's behavior in the episode the conclusion of his Flanderization arc, in which his anxiety about Margaret had been allowed to swallow his entire personality. Reviewers complained that the episode hijacks Muscleman's wedding to make it about Mordecai's emotional life. Multiple longtime viewers wrote that this was the episode where they stopped watching the show. The episode aired on June 25th, 2015. By that date, the average viewership of a regular show episode had been falling steadily for almost 2 seasons. What people miss when they describe season 6 as the worst season is that the writers did not suddenly forget how to write. The writers were trapped. They had built a love triangle that could not be resolved without breaking a promise the show had been making for years. They tried to write their way out of it by extending the indecision across an entire season, and the audience read the indecision exactly as it was, which was a stall. There is a useful comparison here, which is that some of the best long-running comedies in television history have managed will they won't they triangles successfully. The Office got Jim and Pam together. Cheers eventually paired Sam with Diane and then released him. Friends went through several iterations before settling. Each of those shows had something regular show did not have, which was time. 22-minute episodes, 24 episodes a season, multiple seasons to develop the third corner of the triangle as a real character. Regular show had 11 minutes per episode and a slacker comedy register that did not allow long emotional scenes. The romantic plotting kept eating into the comedy. The comedy kept feeling thinner because of it. By the end of season 6, individual episodes were averaging around 1.5 to 1.7 million viewers, down from peaks of 3 million in seasons 3 and 4. What is interesting, and what has been written about much less than the failure of the romantic arc, is that not every episode of season 6 is a romantic stall. Many of them are actually quite good. The episode Format Wars 2, in which the park employees fight a war between physical media formats, is a strong absurdist piece. The episode New Bro on Campus, with Pops, drew 2.241 million viewers, the highest of season 6. There is an episode called The End of Muscle Man, which is the lowest rated of the season at 1.383 million viewers, but is structurally fine and emotionally resonant. The problem is not that every episode is bad. The problem is that the show had committed to 2 narrative spines simultaneously, the standalone slacker comedy spine and the long arc romantic spine, and could no longer commit fully to either. Watch what is happening to the form here. The 11-minute engine, the small to cosmic to small rhythm of seasons 1 and 2, is now being asked to share runtime with romantic continuity that requires multiple episodes to resolve. So in the worst case episodes, you get romantic stalling that does not pay off until 5 episodes later, which means the current episode feels half empty. In the best case episodes, you get the original engine working at high pitch, but the romantic arc is hovering off stage, and the audience cannot fully relax into the small Tuesday because the larger arc is unresolved. This is the part of the decline that is structural, not personal. The writers were not lazy. The actors were not phoning it in. The animation was not getting worse. The director was not asleep at the wheel. The thing that was happening was that the show had committed to a narrative architecture that the original form could not carry, and the form was breaking under the weight. There is a moment in the middle of season 6 that captures this for me more clearly than any other. It is in the episode Format Wars 2. The park crew has been split apart by the war between disc-based media formats. The disc format characters, including Laserdisc Guy and Blu-ray Guy and DVD Guy, are personifications who have been a recurring background element of the show since season 4. They argue, they fight, they betray each other. The episode is fully absurd in the original regular show register. And then the episode ends. And the fact that you have just watched a 22-minute resolution to a war between physical media formats does not actually advance any of the characters' emotional arcs. The episode is a perfect regular show episode, in the original sense, sitting inside a season where every other episode is being asked to do 6 other things at once. The contrast, which the show could not have avoided, once it committed to its serialized direction, is between what regular show used to be and what it had to become. Both versions are good. Neither is, in itself, a failure. They just cannot live in the same room. By the time season 6 ended on June 25th, 2015, with the breakup at the wedding and CJ running out the door, the writers had begun to admit in interviews that the show was approaching its end. 12 days after Dumped at the Altar aired, on July 7th, 2015, Cartoon Network announced that the 8th season of regular show would be its last. That announcement was, in effect, a runway. The writers had 2 more seasons to land the plane, and in those 2 seasons, they would do something almost no one expected. They would partially find the original show again, and they would lose it forever. The network and the quiet migration. Before we walk through what season 7 and season 8 actually became, you need a piece of context that the show itself never put on screen, but that you can feel in every choice the writers made from 2014 onward. That context is the broader collapse, across the same 5-year window, of the kind of show Cartoon Network used to be. When regular show premiered on September 6th, 2010, Cartoon Network was in the middle of an extraordinary creative renaissance. Adventure Time had premiered in April of 2010, 5 months before regular show. The Amazing World of Gumball would premiere in May 2011. Steven Universe would premiere in November 2013. Clarence and Uncle Grandpa, both of which had originated in the same Cartoonstitute project that produced regular show, would premiere in 2014. Over the Garden Wall, the network's most acclaimed limited series, would air in November 2014. For roughly 4 years, Cartoon Network was, by some measures, the most artistically interesting English-language animation studio in the world. Regular show's fortunes have to be understood inside that pack. In 2010 and 2011, the show was the highest-rated new launch on the network, and one of the highest-rated launches in the network's history. By 2013, it was sharing the cultural oxygen with Adventure Time, Steven Universe, and Gumball, 3 shows that had each acquired their own passionate online fandoms. The audience for adult-friendly animation was bigger than it had ever been, but it was being divided across more shows. By 2015, the network was scheduling regular show in less prominent slots, often Friday nights, and the streaming environment was pulling viewers away from cable in general. The premier viewership of regular show episodes, which had averaged above 2 million in 2011 and 2012, was averaging below 1.5 million by 2015. The decline was not unique to regular show. Adventure Time was experiencing the same phenomenon at the same time. The 7th and 8th seasons of Adventure Time, which aired in 2015 and 2016, drew steadily smaller premiere audiences than the first 3 seasons. Both shows had the same problem, which was that the cable model was collapsing underneath them. Cartoon Network's audience was migrating to streaming. Streaming, at that moment, did not yet have a clear payment model for new, long-running cartoons. The network had to keep producing, but the financial logic of the production was getting weaker every quarter. What this meant, practically for the writer's room of regular show, was that they were being asked to keep going, but with less confidence about how long they could go. The renewal as cancellation announcement of July 7th, 2015 was, in this sense, a relief. It gave the show a finite runway. It told the writers that they had 2 more seasons to land the show. It also meant that everything they had set up across seasons 3 through 6 now had to be paid off in seasons 7 and 8. There is another piece of this you can see in the credits, which almost no fan retrospective ever talks about, but which I think matters. Across the run of the show, individual writers and storyboard artists who had been with regular show since season 1 began leaving for other projects. By the 5th and 6th seasons, several of the show's strongest individual contributors had moved on. The 5th season's storyboard team included Andres Saloff, who left to become a supervising director on Adventure Time, and Hilary Florido, who moved on to work on Steven Universe. By season 6, Owen Dennis was preparing to develop and run his own show, the highly acclaimed Infinity Train, which he eventually launched in 2019. The brain trust that had built the original engine of regular show was by 2014 and 2015, partially in the process of leaving the building. That migration is not a failure. Those people were not abandoning a sinking ship. They were doing what creatively ambitious animation people do, which is move toward the next thing. But the practical effect on regular show was that the writer's room of season 6 and onward was more and more made up of people who had not been there for the original engine. The replacement writers were skilled. They were also working on a show whose tonal Dina had been set by people who were not in the room anymore. You can see this in the texture of the late seasons in a way that is hard to articulate without sounding harsh. The episodes are not bad. They are in some ways more polished. The action is faster. The gags are more confident. The supporting cast is more developed. But the rhythm is slightly off. The contrast between small and cosmic, the size shape of the original episodes, is not always there. The cosmic stuff is often introduced earlier in the episode. The small stuff, when it appears, sometimes feels like a wrapper around the cosmic stuff, rather than the spine that the cosmic stuff hangs off of. If you grew up watching regular show, and you stopped watching at some point in season 5 or 6, and someone told you the show was getting worse, what you were actually noticing, almost certainly, was this. The texture had shifted. Not because the writers were less talented, but because the writers were partially different, and the show was structurally being asked to do different things. This is the part of the decline that gets blamed in fan retrospectives on the network. People say Cartoon Network executives interfered. People say the studio rushed the production. People say the show was meddled with. As far as anyone outside the writer's room can tell, almost none of that is actually true. Quintel was given the same creative latitude in Season 7 that he was given in Season 1. The studio supported the production. The space arc, which is the thing fans complain about most often, was Quintel's idea, not a network mandate. The writer's room continued to be staffed by people who cared deeply about the show. The decline was internal. It was structural. And it was, in some real sense, the cost of the show having grown up. The audience that watched the show in 2010 was watching for the small Tuesday. The audience that was still watching in 2016 was watching mostly for the romantic arc and the supporting cast. Both audiences were real. The show had to choose. And by the time you reach the end of Season 6, with the wedding meltdown finale and the collapse of the love triangle, the show had effectively chosen. It had chosen to become something other than what it started as. And the next 2 seasons would be the show finishing its transformation. The year Rigby had to grow up, Season 7 of regular show ran from June 26, 2015 to June 30th, 2016, across 36 episodes. By any structural measure, it is one of the most ambitious seasons of the show. It opens with the Margaret CJ love triangle officially closed and Mordecai single, and it ends with a half-hour finale, Rigby's graduation day special, that sends the entire main cast and the park itself into outer space. In between, it is full of small, character-focused episodes that for long stretches feel like the writers remembered exactly what made the early show work. Watch what happens to the focus of the show in Season 7. The romantic plotting is essentially shelved. Rigby's character, which had been somewhat sidelined during the love triangle years, is brought back to the center. There are episodes about Rigby's relationship with his parents. There are episodes about Rigby and Eileen, who have been quietly together since the Season 6 finale. There is an episode in which Rigby discovers he never actually finished high school. There is an episode about Rigby applying himself for the first time in his life to schoolwork. There is an episode about Rigby studying for a final exam. The arc builds methodically across most of the season toward Rigby's high school graduation. This is a specific creative choice, and it is, in retrospect, the show writing its own goodbye to its original premise. Here is what most fans do not articulate but feel intuitively when they rewatch Season 7. Rigby in Season 1 was a 23-year-old raccoon who had dropped out of high school, who lived above the snack bar at a public park, who worked the same dead-end groundskeeping job as his best friend, and who spent every evening trying to play one more video game before bed. The early show was fundamentally a celebration of that life. The form of the show, the small Tuesday with the cosmic punchline, was a celebration of that life. The point of the comedy was not that Rigby and Mordecai were going to grow up. The point was that they were not. The point was that the small, slacker, half-formed life had its own dignity and its own absurd grandeur, and that you could find magic in a hot dog, or a video game, or a hole in a wall. Rigby graduating from high school is the show repudiating that thesis. When Rigby finishes his graduation speech in Rigby's graduation day special, the speech is structurally about the value of doing the hard thing. He talks about how he spent his whole life avoiding effort, and how this was the first thing he ever genuinely worked for, and how the lesson of the experience is that once you do the hard stuff, it becomes not that hard. The speech is well written. The episode has a strong IMDb rating, currently above 9.5 out of 10. Many fans cite it as one of the great episodes of the show. The emotional arc lands. It also retires, on screen, the central premise of the show. The original premise of regular show was that not doing the hard thing was the joke. The original premise was that Mordecai and Rigby would do anything, including travel to the moon, fight a Yeti, and accidentally end the world, to avoid simple work. The comedy of the show was the energy gap between the size of the cosmic disasters they fell into and the size of the regular tasks they were trying to avoid. Make Rigby graduate, and you have made him into someone who can do the hard thing. He is no longer the engine of the show's original comedy. He has crossed an arc. Crossing an arc is, in dramatic terms, growth. Growth is, in narrative terms, the resolution of a story. And the resolution of a story is, in cartoon terms, the reason the show eventually has to end. This is what the writers were doing, intentionally or not. They were preparing the audience for the end of the show by giving the characters one final piece of growth. They had already done it more quietly with Mordecai during the love triangle, in which his arc had been about learning he could not coast on charm and avoidance forever. They had done it with Muscle Man, who had married Starla in season 6. They had done it slowly with Skips, who had been given his backstory and his closure. By the time you reach the end of season 7, every member of the original ensemble has in some way been moved out of the frozen 23-year-old slacker register that the show originally celebrated. This is why season 7 is, on a per-episode basis, often quite good, and yet feels, when watched as a season, like the original show is gone. The episodes are well crafted, the character work is strong, the arc is satisfying, and the form, the original size shape of the original engine, is mostly absent. There are still flashes of it. There is an episode called Cool Cubed, in which the duo drink an extreme energy drink and have a small adventure. There is an episode called Eileen Flat Screen, in which a TV setup turns into a small, absurdist plot. There are good Rigby and Mordecai goof around moments scattered through the season, but the heart of the season is the graduation arc. The slacker comedy is now a coming-of-age drama in slacker drag. This is not a betrayal. This is a graduation. In the literal sense, the show is graduating out of itself. The form that defined the original engine is being closed off, gently, on purpose, so that the show can move into its final phase. What that final phase looks like is the part of regular show that most divides its audience. Some fans love it, some fans never forgave it, and for a structural understanding of why the show declined, it is the most important phase of all. It is, of course, the year the entire cast went to space. The space year, the 8th and final season of Regular Show, was officially branded by Cartoon Network as Regular Show in Space. It premiered on September 26th, 2016, with an episode called One Space Day at a Time. It ended on January 16th, 2017, with a 33-minute 3-part finale called A Regular Epic Final Battle. The season comprised 27 episodes, including 2 double-length specials and the 3-part finale. The season had been announced as the show's final season more than a year earlier, on July 7th, 2015. The writers had 2 seasons to land the plane. They used the second one to fly the plane into orbit. The basic premise of season 8 is that the events of the season 7 finale, in which a network of scientists who had been monitoring the park in secret turned out to be space-age researchers, ended with the entire park being launched into outer space. The park house, the cart, the snack bar, the lawn, all of it lifted off the surface of the Earth and went into space. The cast, who were on the lawn, went with it. They have to learn to live in their new orbital home, which is now docked at a structure called the Space Tree. They befriend, or fail to befriend, the various alien species who run the Space Tree. They have small adventures in space. The structure of Season 8 is, for its first 16 episodes or so, basically the structure of the early show, transposed into a space setting. Small problems. Cosmic complications. Return to small. It does not really work. It does not work for a specific structural reason. The original engine of the show, the engine that the early seasons depended on, was the contrast between small stakes and cosmic stakes. The premise was that 2 roommates had to fix a hole in their wall and ended up on the moon. The cosmic was the punchline. The small was the spine. When you set the show in space, the small is no longer small. The setting is already cosmic. So when Mordecai and Rigby try to fix a small problem, the problem cannot escalate into the cosmic for comic effect, because the cosmic is the floor of the show, not the ceiling. There is a writer's blog post about Season 8 that captures this beautifully. It comes from a Regular Show retrospective written by a fan and critic named Cookie Fonster on September 30th, 2022. He wrote that the Season 8 episodes often feel disjointed from the usual appeal of Regular Show. He wrote that some episodes feel more like the kind of mishaps with a freaky alien culture episode you would get in Futurama or Rick and Morty than Regular Show. He cites Lost and Found, the 5th episode of Season 8, as a prime example. The point he is making, which I think is exactly right, is that once you have set regular show in space, the show has to compete with the genre conventions of every other space cartoon. It is no longer doing the thing only it could do. It is doing the thing that 10 other shows do better. That is the structural critique of Season 8, and it is correct as far as it goes. But what the structural critique misses is the second half of the season, which is, by some measures, the best run of episodes in the entire 8-year history of the show. Around the 17th episode of Season 8, an antagonist appears who changes the entire shape of the season. His name is Anti-Pops. He is, exactly as his name suggests, the inverse of Pops. He looks like Pops. He has the same lollipop-shaped head. He is also a malevolent cataclysmic being who has been waiting to destroy the universe and who turns out to be Pop's brother. The reveal that Pops is not a wealthy lollipop-headed weirdo from a small town in California, but is in fact one half of a binary cosmic being whose existence holds the universe in balance, recontextualizes the entire show. Every Pops episode, going back to Season 1, becomes retroactively darker. Pop's constant good cheer, his refusal to engage with conflict, his almost otherworldly innocence are no longer eccentric character traits. They are coping mechanisms for being half of an impossible cosmic equation that he was always going to have to settle. This is, structurally, an incredible piece of long game writing. The show had been seeding the metaphysics of Pops for 8 seasons without telling the audience that it was doing so. The reveal lands hard. The final 10 episodes of the show are about Pops gradually accepting that he is going to have to fight Anti-Pops, that the fight will mean Pops dying, that the universe will only survive if Pops sacrifices himself, and that all of his friends in the park crew will be there with him at the end. The penultimate episode of the run, called Meet the Seer, is metafictional in a way the show had never previously attempted. The disc format characters, who have been recurring in the show since Season 4, the Laserdisc guy, and the DVD guy, and the Blu-ray guy, are revealed to be members of an ancient cosmic order. They face off against a personification of streaming services, an antagonist whose existence is treated as a dire spiritual threat. The episode pays off in a single 22-minute unit, an arc that began as a one-off joke about physical media in Season 4. You can love or hate the space arc of regular show. Reasonable people disagree. What you cannot honestly say about it is that the writers stopped caring or stopped trying. The opposite is true. The writers, by Season 8, were trying harder than they had in any previous season. They were swinging for the largest possible payoff. They were treating their cartoon as if it deserved a 33-minute 3-part finale that would attempt to land the entire mythology of an 8-season show. And, by most accounts, they pulled it off. The series finale, a regular epic final battle, aired on January 16th, 2017. It was watched by 1.365 million viewers, which made it the most watched episode of Season 8, even though it was a substantial drop from the show's peak ratings. In the finale, Pops fights Anti-Pops in a duel that takes place across multiple realities. Mordecai and Rigby pilot 2 small spaceships through the fists of the 2 cosmic twins. The rest of the park crew, including Skips, Benson, Muscle Man, High Five Ghost, Pops, and Eileen, transform into a single massive mecha. Old allies and old enemies return for the final battle. Pops and Anti-Pops grow to enormous size. The universe is gradually erased around them. Pops, in the final moments, sacrifices himself and absorbs Anti-Pops, ending the cosmic threat at the cost of his own existence. The remaining members of the park crew, finding themselves alive in a scarred but still extant universe, have to come back to the park on Earth and figure out what to do with the rest of their lives. The final scene of the show, after a 25-year time jump, takes place at the same park. Mordecai is now married to a new character, a Batwoman artist named Steph, with whom he has had several children. Rigby and Eileen are also married, with children. Skips, Benson, and the rest of the cast have grown older. The grown-up children play in the park. The adults, who used to be children, sit and watch them play. Then, at the very end of the episode, Mordecai and Rigby briefly relive the first minute of the pilot episode, The Power, the original 11-minute episode that aired on September 6th, 2010, in which they were 23 years old and wrestling with a stuffed doll in their bedroom and accidentally punching a hole in the wall. That callback, which is so quiet most viewers miss it on their first watch, is the show explicitly closing the loop. Regular show ends with the show acknowledging that the story it has been telling across 8 seasons and 244 episodes has been the story of those 2 characters not being 23 anymore. The decline of regular show, in this light, is not a failure. The decline is the subject. The show was always going to have to grow up, because the audience watching the show was going to grow up, and because the writers making the show were going to grow up, and because the characters living inside the show could not be 23 forever, even though that was, technically possible inside the diegesis of an animated cartoon. The show could have stayed frozen. It could have remained a 23-year-old slacker comedy across all 8 seasons. It would have been a worse show, in the long run, if it had. But that is not the same as saying the decline did not happen. The decline happened. You can hear it in the texture of the episodes. You can see it in the ratings. You can read it in the fan reactions. The show that was, in 2011, the most watched cable cartoon in its time slot among boys had become, by 2016, a Friday night quiet exit. The writer's room had partially turned over. The original engine had been retired. The second engine, the serialized arc-driven engine, had taken over and had carried the show successfully across an emotionally satisfying finale. But the second engine was not the same engine, and the show that had run on the second engine was not the same show. This is the core observation of the entire essay. Regular show got worse every season, because every season it became less of itself and more of something else. The replacement was not a betrayal. It was, in some sense, a maturation. But maturation, for a show whose entire premise was the absurd dignity of staying small, is a kind of death, even when it is also, structurally, a kind of life. The pattern across the network, almost everything that happened to regular show across its 8-season run, also happened, in close to the same shape, to the other major Cartoon Network animated comedies of the same era. This is the part of the decline that is rarely discussed in single-show retrospectives, because single-show retrospectives are about that single show. But once you see the pattern across multiple shows, you start to understand that the decline of regular show was not a regular show problem. It was a structural problem with the form itself. Adventure Time premiered on April 5th, 2010, 5 months before regular show. It also began as a small, anthological, monster of the week 11-minute show with no continuity. Finn the human and Jake the dog had small, weird, episodic adventures across a candy-coated post-apocalyptic landscape. The first 3 seasons of Adventure Time, like the first 3 seasons of regular show, are widely considered the show's high point. Around season 4, the show began acquiring a deeper mythology. It introduced the Lich, a recurring villain. It revealed that the post-apocalyptic landscape was in fact post-apocalyptic in the literal sense, and that the cute talking princesses and candy people existed in the wreckage of a real human civilization that had been destroyed in the Mushroom War. The show acquired memory. The show developed romantic arcs. The show began telling longer multi-episode stories. By season 7, the original engine had been replaced by a heavily mythological serialized engine. The show ended on September 3rd, 2018, after 10 seasons and 283 episodes, with a 4-part finale called Come Along With Me that attempted to resolve every mythological thread the show had built. Sound familiar? Steven Universe premiered on November 4th, 2013. It also began as a small Monster of the Week show, in which a child named Steven hung out with 3 magical guardians and got into low-stakes adventures in a beach town. The first 2 seasons are mostly self-contained. By season 3, the show had begun building a deep mythology about the Crystal Gems, the Diamond Authority, the war that had created the world of the show, and the cosmic stakes that hung over Steven's destiny. By the end of its main run on January 21st, 2019, the show had transformed entirely into a serialized space opera. A coda series, Steven Universe Future, attempted to resolve the emotional fallout of the cosmic narrative. Many fans who loved the show in its early seasons stopped watching somewhere in the middle. The Amazing World of Gumball, which premiered in May 2011, is the closest thing to an exception, and even Gumball is only an exception in degree. Across its 6 seasons, Gumball mostly stayed loyal to its episodic comedy form. It did not develop the kind of multi-season serialized arcs that Regular Show or Adventure Time or Steven Universe did. But Gumball still developed creeping continuity, increasingly mythological villains, and self-aware meta-commentary about its own status as a cartoon, especially in its final season. The show ended in June 2019 with an unfinished plot thread that the creator, Ben Bocquelet, has been trying to resolve through a sequel film for years. Each of these shows is, in some sense, the same story. A young creator pitches a small, absurdist 11-minute show. The show is a hit. The network renews. The creator and the writer's room start adding mythology, romance, character arcs, and serialized continuity. The audience splits into the audience that wanted the original engine and the audience that wants the new engine. The original engine starts to feel thin. The serialized engine carries the show through a few more seasons. The show ends with a large finale that tries to deliver an emotional payoff to the serialized arc. Some fans love the finale. Some fans say the show should have ended 3 seasons earlier. Both are correct. The reason this pattern keeps happening is not because each writer's room independently arrived at the same mistake. The reason this pattern keeps happening is because because the form itself, the 11-minute Cartoon Network original animated comedy, has structural conditions that almost guarantee it. Here is what those conditions are. First, the form is too short to do serialized character drama in any single episode. 11 minutes is not enough time to set up an emotional beat, develop it, and pay it off. So if the show wants to do character development, it has to spread that development across multiple episodes. Spreading it across multiple episodes means serialization. Once you have started serialization, you cannot easily go back because the audience now expects each episode to advance the arc. You have committed to memory. Second, the form is too long running to stay in one place. A typical Cartoon Network original of this era is renewed for between 5 and 10 seasons, with anywhere from 50 to 250 episodes. Across that many episodes, even the most committed writer's room will run out of self-contained 11-minute premises. They will start reaching for the well of larger arcs because the well of small premises has been drained. They will introduce mythology because mythology, unlike Weekly Mischief, scales. There is no upper bound on the size of a mythology. There is, eventually, an upper bound on the number of distinct sandwich-related premises any human being can write. Third, the audience that watches an animated comedy at age 10 is not the same audience that watches it at age 17, but the show is still talking to them. The audience grows up. The show grows up with them, partially because the writers want to make a show their now older audience can still love, partially because the writers themselves have grown up across the run of the show. The original 11-minute slacker comedy was, at the level of Register, a children's and college student show. By the end of the run, when the original audience is in college and the writers have aged into their 30s, the register naturally shifts. It becomes more emotional, more thematic, more concerned with mortality and meaning and growing up. None of those concerns fit comfortably inside the original engine. This is the Cartoon Network curse, and it is a curse that operates not on individual shows, but on the form. Regular Show was not a victim of the curse in any unique way. It was simply one of the cleanest examples of how the curse operates. The same trajectory you can trace across Mordecai and Rigby, you can trace across Finn and Jake, across Steven and the Gems, across Gumball and Darwin. Small show, episodic engine, memory accrues, serialization takes over, audience splits, original engine retires. Show goes out on a finale that resolves the mythology and breaks the hearts of the fans who wanted the original engine back. What this means for the question of whether Regular Show got worse every season is that the answer is more complicated than it first looks. Yes, the show got worse, in the specific sense that it stopped being the thing that originally made it special. No, the show did not get worse, in the sense that the show it became was, in some technical respects, a more accomplished and more emotionally ambitious piece of long-form animation than the show it started as. Both things are true. They are both true, because the show could not be one thing without not being the other. You cannot have the Small Tuesday and the cosmic mythology in the same hour of television. You can have them in different hours. You cannot have them in the same one. Regular Show is one of the cleanest illustrations of this paradox in 21st century animation, and the paradox is not unique to Regular Show. It is the central tension of the form. The audience aged with it. Almost every conversation about Regular Show declining is, when you read it carefully, also a conversation about the audience aging. If you watched Regular Show when it premiered in September of 2010, and you were 12 years old at the time, you are now in your late 20s. You are roughly the age that Mordecai and Rigby were in the show. The version of you that watched the pilot is gone. You have a job, possibly a career, possibly a partner, possibly children. The world you live in is not the world the show was made for. And the world you used to live in, the bedroom in your parents' house with the laptop balanced on your stomach at midnight, while the show played quietly in the background, is also gone. This is the second axis of the show's decline, and it is the axis that gets the least careful analysis. The show did not just become a different show across its 8-year run. The audience also became a different audience. Both the show and the audience were aging in parallel, and they were not aging at the same rate. When you say a show got worse, what you often mean when you press on the statement is that you stopped relating to it the way you used to. You can rewatch the early episodes of Regular Show today, in 2026, with 16 years of distance from the original air dates. The episodes have not changed. The hand-drawn animation, the synth pop score, the hole in the wall, the keyboard, the moon, all of it is exactly as it was in September 2010. The show that has changed is the show inside your head when you watch them. The associations are different. The references land differently. The 1980s nostalgia register, which the writers used because they grew up in the 1980s, hits you differently if you grew up in the 2000s and were watching the show show in the 2010s and are now watching it in the 2020s. The cultural distance keeps accumulating. The show keeps moving away from you, even though you are the one moving. What this means for the perceived decline is that some portion of what fans report when they say season 5 or season 6 was where the show got worse is not actually about the show. It is about the moment of their own life when they stopped being the right age for the show. A 12-year-old in 2010 is not a 17-year-old in 2015. A 17-year-old wants different things from a cartoon than a 12-year-old does. The show that hit the 12-year-old in the chest is not the show the 17-year-old needs. By the time you are 17, you are starting to notice that the show is doing the same kinds of jokes it did 3 years ago. You are noticing, fairly, that the form has become predictable. You are also noticing, less fairly, that the show is no longer hitting the part of you it used to hit, because that part of you is no longer there. This is the part of the decline that is, in a strict sense, not the show's fault. The show kept being itself, more or less. You stopped being yourself. The friction between the two is what we sometimes call growing out of something. We talk about it as if it were a property of the thing we grew out of, but it is more accurately a property of the relationship between us and the thing. There is a version of this argument that gets used to defend bad television. People say, well, you just grew out of it, the show is fine. That argument is a cheat. There are real declines in real shows that have nothing to do with the audience aging. Regular show genuinely changed across its run. The form genuinely degraded. The original engine genuinely retired. None of that is in the audience's head. All of that happened on the screen. When you say regular show got worse, you are pointing at something real. But the something real is intertwined with the something subjective, and they cannot be cleanly separated. The show got worse, and you got older, and these two facts are connected, because the show was made by people who were getting older alongside an audience that was getting older. And the cumulative effect of all that aging is what we're calling the decline. There is something tender in this, if you let yourself sit with it. The show grew up because the people making it grew up. The audience grew up because audiences grow up. The decline is, in some sense, a record of growing up. It is what time looks like when you record it inside a cartoon. The most powerful single moment in the entire show, for me, is not in any of the early episodes. It is in the final scene of a regular epic final battle in which Mordecai and Rigby, 25 years older, sit in the park where they used to work, watching their grown children play. They are now the age that the supporting cast was when the show began. They are now older than the show ever directly depicted them being. They look around, they drink a soda, they reminisce. The original episode that started the show plays back briefly inside this future. They are watching their younger selves wrestle with the doll Beef Burrito and punch the hole in the wall. That scene is, structurally, the show admitting that it had to age. It admits that the Small Tuesday could not last forever. It admits that 23 is a year of life, not a permanent address. It admits that even cartoons grow up. And it admits, quietly, that the version of the show you fell in love with in 2010 was always going to disappear, because it was always going to be displaced by the version of the show that the writers, the actors, the network, and the audience needed to make next. You could argue, and many people do, that the show should have stayed exactly where it was. That seasons 3 through 8 should have just been more 11-minute Tuesdays, with no romantic arcs, no recurring villains, no space, no mythology, no graduation, no anti-pops, no 25-year time jump. You can imagine that show. You can imagine it as 12 more seasons of small, perfect, episodic comedy. You can also imagine it as the show losing its writers, losing its energy, losing its audience, and getting canceled in season 4 for being repetitive, because nothing on television gets to stay the same for 8 years and remain good. The first show, The Small Tuesday Show, was perishable. It had a lifespan. Quintel and his writers stretched that lifespan to about 3 seasons before the form started straining. They could not have stretched it much further. The choice they faced around season 4 was not between the original show and a different show. The choice was between gracefully transitioning into a different show or watching the original show curdle in front of them. They transitioned. The transition cost the show some of what it originally had. The transition also gave the show new things it did not originally have. And in the end, the transition was the show. The decline is not a story of failure. The decline is a story of a cartoon that was honest about the cost of running for 8 years. The texture that disappeared when fans of the early seasons try to articulate what they miss about regular show. They almost always reach for something they cannot quite name. They say things like, the show used to have a different feeling. They say, the energy was different. They say, the early episodes hit different. They are right, but they have a hard time explaining what they are pointing at. What they are pointing at is texture. Texture in a long-running animated show is the sum of all the small production choices that do not show up on a plot summary. It is the kind of paper the animators are drawing on. It is the brand of synthesizer the composer is using. It is the half-second pause between a punchline and the cut to the next scene. It is the size of the pixels in the closing credits. It is the specific shade of green of Muscle Man's skin. It is the placement of the laugh track, except there is no laugh track, and the laugh-shaped silence where a laugh track would be. It is the rhythm of the way the writers leave words out of dialogue. Regular Show's texture in seasons 1 and 2 was specific. The animation was, as I mentioned earlier, hand-drawn on paper, not on Cintiq tablets. Quintal personally insisted on this, and his board artists, including Calvin Wong, have written about how the tools of the show were pencils, pens, whiteout, and occasionally light boxes and electric erasers. That fact, which sounds like trivia, has actual visual consequences. The lines wobble between frames. The edges of characters move slightly with the artist's hand. The animation has, in a real and measurable way, the temperature of human skin on it. You can feel that the show was made by people who were drawing it. The score, by Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo, used analog synthesizers and gentle electronic pads in a register that consciously echoed 1980s television music. The licensed tracks, mostly from the late 1970s and 1980s, were chosen, as Quintal has said in interviews, for their suitability for the scene, whether they sounded good, and whether their licensing was affordable. The licensing affordability part is interesting because it suggests that the music selection was, in some sense, constrained by reality. They could not always get the song they wanted. They had to use the song that was available and worked. That negotiation, which is invisible to the audience, was part of what gave the early show its texture. The songs felt found, not curated. By season 6 and 7, the texture had shifted. The hand-drawn animation was still hand-drawn, but the supporting cast had been redesigned slightly across the seasons. The colors were a little brighter. The line work was a little cleaner. The backgrounds were more detailed. None of these changes are bad in themselves. They reflect a more confident production. They also reflect a show that had, by season 6, been on the air for half a decade and had developed institutional habits about how its frames should look. The frames had become more polished. They had also become slightly less alive. The wobble that you could feel in season 1 had not disappeared, but it had quieted. The score, similarly, had shifted. By the late seasons, Mothersbaugh's themes were still the spine of the show, but the licensed music budget had grown, and the show had begun to use bigger needle drops in important emotional moments. The use of Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds in the season 7 finale, Rigby's Graduation Day special, is a beautiful piece of musical scoring. It is also, in the context of the show's history, a different kind of musical decision than the early licensed tracks. It is consciously emotional. It is doing the work of moving the audience to tears in a deliberate way. The early show used licensed tracks more incidentally, often for montages or comedy, with a slightly more sideways relationship to the emotional content of the scene. This is, I think, the part of the decline that fans are pointing at when they say the energy is different. The texture got more polished, more deliberate, more confident, and slightly less spontaneous. The show that had been made in 2010, by a writer's room of people in their 20s making the show they wanted to watch, had become, by 2016, a show made by a writer's room of people in their 30s making a show that was about closing a story. Both shows were good. They had different textures. And the second texture displaced the first slowly enough that you could not point at the moment it happened. You can sometimes see a similar phenomenon in long-running live-action sitcoms, where the early seasons feel rougher, more energetic, more accidentally funny, and the later seasons feel slicker, more efficient, more deliberately funny. The roughness of the early seasons is not because the writers were less skilled. The roughness is the byproduct of the writers not yet knowing exactly what the show was. The slickness of the later seasons is the byproduct of the writers knowing too well. There is a sweet spot somewhere in seasons 2 through 4 of most shows where the writers know what the show is, but have not yet started to over-execute on that knowledge. That sweet spot for regular show is around seasons 2 and 3. After season 3, the show's writers start to know what they are doing too well. They start to make sure every emotional beat lands. They start to construct each season around an arc. They start to put callbacks into episodes for the dedicated viewers. None of this is bad. All of this is professional, and all of it in aggregate gives the show a slight quality of being made on purpose, where the early show had the quality of being made because the writers had nothing better to do and were having fun. You cannot unknow what you know. Once a writer's room has discovered that they are making a hit show, they cannot pretend they are not. Once they have noticed that fans love a particular kind of episode, they cannot resist making more episodes like that. Once they have seen which character beats land, they will write those beats again, and the second writing will be a little more deliberate than the first. The discovery cannot be undiscovered. The texture of accidental brilliance cannot be reproduced once it has become intentional. This is the deepest level of why regular show, like every long-running cartoon, got worse every season. Not because the writers got worse, because they got better. They got more skilled. They knew the show better. They were more deliberate. And every increment of that deliberateness moved the show slightly away from the accidental, half-formed, slightly clumsy, hand-drawn, inexplicably specific energy that it had in 2010. What you are mourning when you say the show used to be better is partially that. You are mourning the moment when the show was still becoming itself. Once it became itself, it could not be becoming itself any longer. And no matter how good the version of itself that it became turned out to be, it was no longer the version that was still becoming. The rewatch there is something specific that happens when you watch a long-running cartoon you grew up with in your late 20s or early 30s after a decade away from it. You expect, at first, to watch it nostalgically. You expect to feel the warm glow of a thing you used to love. What you actually find, more often than not, is that you are no longer watching the show. You are watching yourself. The first time you rewatch regular show, in 2026, 16 years after the pilot, you are not watching Mordecai and Rigby fix a hole in the wall. You are watching the version of you that was 14 in 2012 and watched this episode for the first time on a school night with the volume low so your parents would not hear. You are watching the kitchen you used to sit in, the laptop you used to own, the apartment you no longer live in, the friends you no longer talk to. The show is not the show. The show is a delivery mechanism for the moment of your life when the show was the show. This is not a criticism of the show. This is a description of how nostalgia works, and it has a specific implication for the question of whether regular show got worse every season. If you ask someone in 2026 which season of regular show is the best, you will mostly hear answers that align with the seasons that aired during the most emotionally formative period of that person's adolescence. Someone who was 13 in 2011 will tell you season 2 is the best season. Someone who was 13 in 2014 will tell you season 5 is the best season. Someone who watched the show for the first time during the pandemic in their early 20s will sometimes tell you season 3 or 4. The seasons that hit you the hardest are the seasons that hit you when you were the right age to be hit. This means the conventional wisdom that regular show got worse every season is, statistically, mostly the conventional wisdom of the audience that started watching in 2010 or 2011. They were the largest single demographic of the show. They are the loudest voices in retrospectives. They have the most invested memory in the early seasons. And they grew up with the show in a way that made the early seasons disproportionately important to them. Of course they think the early seasons were the best. The early seasons were when they were the right age. If you came to regular show late, the picture is different. There is a generation of viewers who watched the show on streaming for the first time in their 20s, in the late 2010s and early 2020s. For many of them, the strongest emotional response is to season 7 and season 8. They love Rigby's graduation day special. They love the space arc. They love Anti-Pops. They love the finale's 25-year time jump. The early seasons audience often does not love these things, because by the time these episodes aired, the early audience had stopped watching, and so the late episodes did not get folded into their formative memory. What you call decline depends on when you walked into the theater. There is a useful exercise here, which is to try, however briefly, to watch the show from the perspective of someone who has never seen it before in 2026. You will find that the early episodes look, by modern animation standards, very rough. The character designs are simple. The animation is sparse. The 1980s synth pop score reads as a stylistic choice rather than as anything emotionally resonant. The pacing is slow. The jokes are hit or miss. You can see why a 12-year-old in 2010 was hooked. You can also see, with completely fresh eyes, that the show in those early seasons is not yet what it would become. It is full of promise. It is sometimes brilliant. It is also rough. The middle seasons, watched fresh, are the strongest. The texture is more confident. The character beats are more developed. The animation has matured. The serialization has not yet swallowed the form. There is a reason that when fans are forced to pick favorite episodes, they often pick episodes from seasons 3 and 4, even though the conventional wisdom says the show was best in seasons 1 and 2. The conventional wisdom is partially nostalgia. The fresh eye verdict is that the show peaked in the middle, and the late seasons, watched fresh, hold up more than the early audience consensus suggests. The space arc is a polarizing creative decision, but it is, technically, well executed. The Pops mythology pays off. The finale is one of the more emotionally complex finales in 2010's animation. The decline that longtime fans see is real, but the floor that the show fell to was still well above what most cartoons ever reach. Even bad regular show is, by most measures, better than most cartoons. This is the gentle paradox of any rewatch. The show you remember is not the show you can rewatch. The show you can rewatch is, by definition, less than the show you remember, because the show you remember is partially you, and you are not in the rewatch. The show that is on the screen is just the show. It is what the writers and animators and composers actually made. It is not bad. It is not even decline-shaped exactly. It is just a thing that became one thing, then another thing, then a third thing, across 8 years. And what we call its decline is mostly the friction between the way it changed and the way we changed alongside it. What I am suggesting, gently, is that part of the answer to the question of why regular show got worse every season is that it did not. Not entirely. Not in the way most people mean when they say it. The show got different. The show got older. The show grew up. The show retired one engine and adopted another. The show ran longer than its original premise could comfortably support. The show ended honestly. None of these are the same as getting worse, even though all of them feel, from the inside, like a kind of loss. The loss is real. The decline is partial. Both are true at the same time. And living with both, instead of picking only one, is closer to the actual experience of having watched something for 8 years than the simple verdict of better or worse can ever be. The return you did not ask for there is one more piece of context worth holding in your mind, especially if you are watching this in 2026. Regular show is, as of this week, technically not over. On June 12th, 2024, Warner Bros. Discovery announced that a new series featuring some characters from regular show had been greenlit. Quintel was returning as showrunner. The series was eventually given the title Regular Show: The Lost Tapes. It was scheduled to premiere worldwide on May 11th, 2026. As of this recording, that premiere is days away. Mark Hamill, who voiced Skips for the entire original run, confirmed his return at the Chicago Fan Expo, telling the audience there is only one Skips. William Salyers, who voiced Rigby, has been heavily implied to be returning as well. Nobody outside the production knows exactly what the new show will be. The available reporting suggests it will revisit some of the original characters, though it is not yet clear whether it will run inside the original timeline or after the 25-year time jump that closed the finale. This is the part where I have to be careful, because I am writing this without having seen the new show. By the time you are listening to this video on your phone or your speaker or your laptop, you may have already seen it. You may have an opinion about it that I cannot have, because as I write this, the new show does not yet exist for me. So I will not tell you what The Lost Tapes is or is not. I will only tell you, structurally, what its existence means for the question we have been asking. It means the show is not, in the strict sense, finished. It means the original engine is being given another chance to run. It means the 7 years between the finale on January 16th, 2017, and the premiere of The Lost Tapes on May 11th, 2026 are not the end of the show. They are an interval, and the interval ends. What this means for the decline thesis of this essay is interesting and not entirely flattering to the thesis. If regular show is being revived in 2026 by the original creator with the original voice cast, then the form that we said had to retire because it could not survive long-running serialization is being asked to run again. Quintel could not have not known, when he agreed to do this, that the new show would be measured against the original. He could not have not known that some portion of the audience was going to write the show off as a betrayal of the perfect ending. He could not have not known that the only way to do this honestly was to do it differently. That is the structural test of The Lost Tapes. Does the new show try to recreate the original engine, The Small Tuesday with Cosmic Punchline, and risk feeling like a tribute act? Does it pick up after the time jump with grown-up Mordecai and grown-up Rigby and their adult lives, and risk turning the show into a different kind of show entirely, the way the late seasons did? Or does it find some third register, neither the original nor the late, that lets the form breathe in a way it did not in the 8-year run? I do not know the answer. By the time you hear this, you may. The question is the interesting one, and the answer will arrive next week. What the existence of The Lost Tapes confirms, in any case, is that the decline of the original 8 seasons was not a permanent verdict on the form. It was a verdict on what 8 years of continuous production does to a particular 11-minute engine. Step away for 7 years, recharge, come back. The engine might still run. It might run differently. It might run only briefly. None of those outcomes are the same as the engine being permanently broken. There is a real and deep optimism in this, if you are willing to take it. The decline of a long-running show is not the death of its possibility. The form can come back. The audience can come back. even after 7 years, even after the cultural moment that produced the original has passed, even after the cable model that supported the production has all but collapsed, even after the audience has aged out of the demographic the show was made for. The form is more resilient than the decline of any single run of it suggests. And the decline of the original run is not, with this in mind, a tragedy. It is a chapter, a long, beautiful, complicated chapter, with good seasons and bad seasons, and great episodes, and terrible finales, and surprising emotional payoffs, and frustrating stalls, and brilliant texture and quiet exhaustion. A chapter that ran from 2010 to 2017 and that is now being followed by a sequel chapter starting May 11th, 2026. The full story of Regular Show is not the 8 seasons of decline. The full story is, eventually, going to include whatever happens next. You will know more about that next chapter than I do by the time you hear this. So I will leave the question with you. What was actually lost if you take everything we have looked at across the last 2 hours and you try to compress it into a single observation? The observation is this: Regular Show did not lose its quality across its run. It lost its specificity. Quality is the wrong axis. The show was, by professional standards, never a low-quality show. The animation was always above the average for cable cartoons of its era. The voice acting was always strong. The writing was always at least competent and often excellent. The score was always interesting. The technical floor of the show, even in its weakest episodes, was high. What the show lost was the thing that made it unmistakably itself. In 2010, you could watch any episode of Regular Show with the sound off for 15 seconds and know what you were watching. The character designs, the color palette, the line work, the rhythm, the comic timing, the textural feeling of the frames, all of it was unmistakable. You could not have confused it for any other show. By 2016, with the show in space and the cosmic plot in full swing, you could watch many episodes and, while still recognizing them as Regular Show, lose the sense that what you were watching could only be Regular Show. Some of the late episodes look, structurally, like they could be from a different cartoon. The Anti-Pops arc could have been an Adventure Time arc. The space episodes could have been Futurama episodes. The Pops mythology could have come from any number of late 2010s long arc cartoons. This is what specificity loss looks like. The show is still good. It is still itself, more or less. But it is no longer only itself. It has converged, partially, with the broader genre conventions of long-running animated comedies. The genre itself has gotten more developed, which means the conventions have gotten stronger, and the gravitational pull of the conventions on any individual show has gotten harder to resist. The first 2 seasons of Regular Show were, in this sense, almost too specific to be sustainable. The show was so much itself that it was running on a kind of fuel that could not be replenished. The fuel was Quintel in his original writer's room making a show about being 23 years old, with all the texture and idiosyncrasy of their actual lives, and the show working because they were not yet experienced enough to file off the rough edges. As they got more experienced, the rough edges got filed. The show became a more polished version of itself. Polish is, in long-running television, almost always the enemy of specificity. You cannot keep the rough edges and also keep getting better at your job. This is, finally, why I think Regular Show is one of the most instructive shows in 21st century animation. It illustrates, more cleanly than almost any other example, the trade-offs that long-running television has to navigate. Quintel and his team did not make a wrong decision somewhere in season 3 or 4. They made the only set of decisions that any honest creative team in their position could have made. They chose to keep going. They chose to grow up. They chose to give the audience an emotional payoff at the end. They chose to honor the characters by aging them. They chose to honor the world they had built by giving its mythology room to expand. Every one of those choices is defensible. Every one of those choices was, in some sense, the right one. And every one of those choices cost the show something it could not get back. Cumulatively, those choices are the decline. The decline is not a sequence of mistakes. The decline is the price of the choices. When you fall asleep tonight, with this video still playing softly in the background, the thing I want you to take away is something quieter than a verdict. It is this: most of the things in your life that have ever lasted long enough to feel like home will, given enough time, become something other than what they originally were. The show will change. The friend will change. The city will change. You will change. And the change is not a betrayal. The change is the only way anything gets to last for 8 years. The alternative to change is ending, and ending too early is its own kind of loss. The thing you mourn when you say something has gotten worse is partially the thing itself, but it is also, just as much, the inevitability of the thing not having stayed. and the inevitability of the thing not having stayed is, in the deepest sense, what made it valuable in the first place. Mordecai and Rigby were 23 years old in the pilot of regular show. They are 23 years old in the final episode, before the time jump. They are 48 years old in the final scene of the finale, sitting in the park where they used to work, watching their grown children play. The show contains the entire arc of those characters not staying 23. The decline of the show is the show telling you that 23 does not last. It cannot last. It was never meant to last. And the fact that, for 244 episodes, you got to keep them at 23 anyway, even as the show around them was changing, even as you were changing, even as the world was changing, is a small piece of grace that you would not have had if the show had ended after season 2. The friendship that carried everything. If you want to know the thing that did not decline across the 8 seasons of regular show, the thing that stayed exactly itself from the first 11 minutes of the pilot to the final frames of the finale, you have to talk about Mordecai and Rigby. The friendship between the Blue Jay and the raccoon is the one element of the show that the writers, by all evidence, never let drift. Across every change in the show's form, every shift in tone, every introduction of a romantic interest, every cosmic escalation, every move into space, every reveal about pops or skips or anti-pops or the Mushroom War equivalent of the show's mythology, the central friendship remained, structurally, the same friendship. The way Mordecai and Rigby talked to each other in Season 8 was the way they talked to each other in Season 1. The dynamic was preserved with a kind of writerly discipline that almost no other element of the show received. This is, I think, the deepest reason the show works as comfort television even at its worst. You can put on any episode of regular show from any season, and within the first 30 seconds, you will hear Mordecai and Rigby having a conversation that sounds exactly the way Mordecai and Rigby conversations have always sounded. The rhythm. The way Rigby gets indignant about small things. The way Mordecai talks Rigby down with a single dragged out dude. The way they say ooh together when they hear something cool. The way they punch each other on the arm. None of this changed. None of it was allowed to change. There are, in interviews, signals that this was a deliberate choice. Quintel has said in multiple appearances that the friendship between Mordecai and Rigby was, for him, the heart of the show, and that he was protective of it across every season. Sean Shales, who directed many of the show's most important episodes and was the real-life basis for the Rigby-Mordecai dynamic during Quintel's college years, was a constant collaborator across the run. The voice performances, with Quintel himself voicing Mordecai and William Salyers voicing Rigby, never wavered. The tonal calibration of those two voices in conversation with each other is, by any technical measure, one of the most consistent voice acting partnerships in 21st century cartoons. What this means for the question of decline is that there is a part of the show that did not decline. There is a part that you can return to in any episode of any season and find waiting for you exactly as it was. The friendship is the constant. The form changed. The romantic arcs changed. The animation got slightly cleaner. The cosmic stakes got bigger. The audience got older. The friendship stayed the same. There is a moment, very late in the show, that captures this. It is in a regular epic final battle, after the universe has been scarred by the Pops anti-Pops fight, after most of the cast has been temporarily wiped out and revived, after the cosmic stakes have been resolved. Mordecai and Rigby are sitting somewhere quiet, talking about what comes next. The show has just spent 30 minutes being the largest possible version of itself, with Battle Mecha and cosmic siblings and the literal end of the universe. And in this quiet moment, the conversation between Mordecai and Rigby sounds exactly like a conversation they would have had in Season 1, in the cart after a small Tuesday gone wrong. Same voices, same rhythm, same cadence, same friendship. That is the show telling you, structurally, that whatever else changed, the thing that mattered most did not. The cosmic plot was scaffolding. The romantic plot was scaffolding. The space arc was scaffolding. The thing the scaffolding was holding up, the thing the show was actually about, was the conversation between two friends. And that conversation never got worse. That conversation was, season after season, exactly what it had always been. This is why, even when the rest of the show was failing, even when fans were giving up on it, even when the ratings were sliding and the writers were leaving and the network was scheduling the show on Friday nights, individual episodes that focused on the Mordecai-Rigby relationship continued to land. There is an episode in Season 7 called Garage Door, in which the two have a small fight about who is going to fix the garage door. That is, in terms of pure character work, as good as anything in the early seasons. There is an episode in Season 8 called Welcome to Space, in which Mordecai and Rigby reflect on their first impression of life in orbit that has the same texture as their early conversations. The friendship was the show's load-bearing element. It bore the load. When you ask whether regular show got worse every season, The answer depends on which axis you are measuring. The form got worse, in the sense that the original engine got displaced. The texture got smoother, which some viewers experience as worse and some as better. The romantic plotting got more frustrating across seasons 4 through 6. The cosmic plotting got more polarizing in seasons 7 and 8. The ratings declined consistently. The cultural footprint of the show shrank year over year, but the friendship at the center of the show did not decline. Not even slightly. Not even at the worst moment of the worst season. Mordecai and Rigby were friends in episode 1, and they were friends in episode 244. The way they were friends did not change. The thing that the writers and voice actors and animators built across 8 years held perfectly steady at the center of a show whose surface was constantly shifting. That is something. That is in fact almost everything. And it is the part of the show that when you are falling asleep tonight, with this video softly continuing in the background, you will most likely return to in your memory if you ever return to regular show again. Not the love triangle, not the space arc, not the controversy over Dumped at the Altar, not the question of which season was best. Just two friends in a cart after a long day, drinking sodas, deciding what to do tomorrow. That part of the show was always good. That part of the show is still good. That part of the show never declined. Why it still works at 3 in the morning there is a question worth asking, gently, since you have been listening to this for almost 2 hours, and you may already be most of the way to sleep. The question is, why a show that, by the standards of careful analysis, declined across most of its run, still functions perfectly well as comfort listening at 3 in the morning. There is no decline at 3 in the morning. The show, played softly, with the volume low, with your eyes closed, is just a friendly murmur in the room. The plot does not matter. The animation does not matter. The romantic arc does not matter. The space arc does not matter. The cosmic mythology does not matter. None of it matters. What matters is the murmur. This is the part of long-form animation that the conventional analysis usually misses. The shows you watch closely, with your full attention, are different shows than the shows you have on while you are falling asleep, or doing the dishes, or driving home from work. The same episode of regular show is two different objects, depending on which mode of attention you are giving it. The full attention object is a piece of comedy with a plot and characters and a payoff. The half attention object is a sound, a texture, a specific quality of voices and music in a room, a reassurance. The early seasons of regular show are, by the standards of full attention watching, more specific and arguably better than the later seasons. The original engine is the original engine. The hand-drawn animation is more alive. The texture is more vivid. The comedy is sharper. But the later seasons are not worse as a half-attention object, as a sound, as a reassurance, as a thing playing in the background while you fall asleep. The later seasons of regular show are interchangeable with the early seasons. The voices are the same voices. The music is the same Mark Mothersbaugh. The rhythm of the conversations is the same rhythm. The murmur is the same murmur. This is why the show, despite its decline, still works as comfort. The decline only matters if you are watching closely. The decline does not matter if you are using the show as a sleep aid, or a work backdrop, or a cooking soundtrack, or any of the other ways that long-form animation actually gets used by adult viewers in 2026, 15 years after the show first aired. There is something almost merciful in this. The decline of the show is, in the strict critical sense, real, and the comfort of the show is, in the actual lived experience of having it on softly while you do other things, also real. Both are true. They are true in different registers. The decline is true at the level of the close-watching critic. The comfort is true at the level of the adult who just wants the room to feel less quiet at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. If you have been falling in and out of sleep through this video, it is possible that almost none of the analysis I have offered has actually landed. That is fine. That is, in some sense, the entire point of why you put a regular show essay on at bedtime. You did not want a verdict. You wanted a long, careful, thoughtful voice talking, quietly, about something familiar, until you could let go of the day. The show, the original 8-season run, is a thing you can let go of as well. It declined. It was beautiful. It was sometimes frustrating. It contained almost everything a long-running cartoon can contain, including the specific kind of decline that only honest cartoons can experience, which is the decline of having grown up. None of that is going anywhere. The show will be there tomorrow, the same as it is tonight. The pilot will be there. The space arc will be there. Rigby's graduation will be there. The wedding meltdown will be there. The 25-year time jump will be there. The Pop's sacrifice will be there. The way Mordecai and Rigby say ooh ooh together will be there. And next week, on May 11th, 2026, a new chapter will begin. You will not have to think about it tonight. Tonight, you can just listen. The last honest question before we close. There is one last question worth asking, because it sits at the center of this entire essay and it does not have a clean answer. answer. The question is whether the decline of regular show is something that should be mourned, or something that should be accepted, or something that should be celebrated. There is a case for each. The case for mourning is the simplest. The show was, in 2010 and 2011 and 2012, a small and specific and beautiful thing that has not been replaced. There is no current cartoon on television in 2026 that does what early regular show did. The form has, at least temporarily, gone out of fashion. The 11-minute slacker comedy with cosmic punchlines is, in the streaming era, an artifact of a previous era of cable. You cannot find a new show that does what regular show did, the way you could in 2012, when you could turn on Cartoon Network and find Adventure Time and regular show and a dozen of their imitators on the same evening. That world is gone. Mourning it is honest. The case for acceptance is also clean. Every long-running show goes through this. Every honest creative team eventually has to choose between repeating themselves and growing. Regular show chose to grow. The growth had costs. The costs were the decline. Accepting that the decline was the cost of the growth is, in the long run, a more peaceful relationship with the show than mourning it forever. Acceptance is also honest. The case for celebration is the hardest, but I think it is also the truest. The decline of regular show, in retrospect, is one of the more graceful long-form transformations that 21st century animation has produced. The show did not curdle. It did not get canceled in a humiliating way. It did not drag on past its welcome the way some long-running shows have. It found a way to grow up, slowly and visibly, on screen, in front of an audience that was also growing up. It built a finale that paid off the 8-year arc. It said goodbye to its characters by aging them through 25 additional years and showing you, in the last scene, that they had remained themselves. It honored the original engine by having Mordecai and Rigby briefly relive the first minute of the pilot before the credits rolled. Most shows do not get to end this honestly. Most shows have their endings imposed on them. Most shows are canceled before they can land their final arc, or are renewed for too long and end up coasting, or get caught in a network restructuring and get dumped without ceremony. Regular show, despite its commercial decline across the back half of its run, was given the resources and the runway and the support to build the ending it wanted. The decline was the structural cost of staying on the air long enough to get that ending, and the ending was worth the cost. When you set the cost against the ending, the ledger is not negative. It might even be positive. The show, taken as a whole, including all the imperfect middle seasons and the polarizing late seasons and the fan revolts and the rating slides, is one of the most complete pieces of long-form animated comedy of its era. Its decline is real. Its decline is also, in the deepest reading, the price the show paid to be allowed to finish itself. And the finish, on January 16th, 2017, with Pop sacrificing himself to save the universe, and Mordecai and Rigby looking back at their younger selves on a hillside in California in 2042, is a finish that almost no other show of its era earned. You can mourn the decline. You can accept it. You can, if you want, celebrate it. None of these are wrong. They are different ways of standing inside the same 8-year story. The story is large enough to hold all three at once. And in 7 days, on May 11th, 2026, that story is going to get a sequel. And we are all going to find out whether the form Quintel built can run again in a world that has, in the meantime, changed in ways that the original show could not have predicted. I do not know what the new show will be. By the time you hear this, you may. The not knowing tonight is fine. The not knowing is part of being awake the day before something starts. For now, you can sleep. We started almost 2 hours ago with 2 cartoon spaceships flying between the fists of a cosmic god and his evil twin brother as the universe was being uncreated around them, and with the contrast between that finale and a pilot in which 2 roommates were trying to cover up a hole in the wall with a stolen wizard's keyboard. 6.5 years separated those 2 moments. 244 episodes of small and large and tiny and cosmic and frustrating and beautiful television lived between them. The keyboard, which had been broken in half by skips at the end of the pilot, was repaired in the late seasons and used by Mordecai and Rigby to travel to the end of the universe. Then it was used in the very last frames to send them back to the first minute of their first day. The keyboard in the world of the show was always magical. The magic was that it could collapse the distance between the smallest possible problem and the largest possible one. That was the entire engine of the show, in a single object, sitting in the closet of a park house, waiting to be used. Regular show got worse every season because no engine, no matter how magical, can run for 8 years without a cost. The cost was the decline. The decline was honest. The keyboard, in the end, took the show home. If anything from the last 2 hours was worth carrying away, subscribing helps more than you would think. Sleep well. The next episode, whenever you choose to play it, will be ready when you are.